rendering 100100111100, and in binary, that means well, hello. Guys, welcome back to the live stream, Steve Conley, because we're not calling it a podcast. Welcome back to the live stream, you guys. This is Pencil to Pencil, coming to you live. I expect you to live.
We have to say that now. We always have to say live.
Welcome back to the internets, you guys. This is Pencil to Pencil, your favorite live stream featuring expert cartoonists, giving you the who, what's, and wherefores, and talking about the other side of the table. What is it like to be a working professional creative cartoonist? There you go. James got the assignment, where you, dear viewer, if you're watching live, get to interact with us. How cool is that? We're broadcasting live on. Oh, okay. Thanks. Live on YouTube and also on the Book of Faces. So thanks so much for joining us tonight. Here, there's a little bit of a echo delay. Do I sound okay to you guys? Okay.
Yeah, I don't hear it on my end, but
all right, we'll figure it out. But yeah, let me just do some stuff here. Guys, I'm going to try to do the intros. Welcome. My name is JAMAR NICHOLAS. In the traditional book space, they call me an author illustrator. And I have a series at Scholastic under the graphics imprint. Leon the Extraordinary is the first in series in stores now. Go pick it up. I'm very excited that the next book in the series will be out this time next year. I would be remiss if I did not introduce one of my co-hosts. You may know him as a world heavyweight champion. You got to do the belt motion. The world heavyweight champion of webcomics, Stone Cold Steve Conley. What's up, Steve Conley?
Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Mike, I feel very underdressed right now.
Mike's wearing a shirt.
Yeah. Okay, look at that. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Conley. I write and draw the webcomic The Middle Age, which you can read at middleagecomic.com. It's on Webtoons and Tapas and Go Comics, everywhere. It's everywhere. And I think I'd be remiss. That's the word. I'd be remiss if I did not introduce the maestro of mark making, the tower of power, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, Mr. Mike Manley.
hello, ladies and germs and all the ships at sea.
Well, hello. What's going on, Mike? Mike, what do you do?
I don't know. What do I do? Some days I wonder.
Explain yourself.
I do 2 syndicated newspaper strips, The Phantom and Judge Parker. The Phantom actually was the first costume superhero in comics. So it's kind of fun. And there's only been, I think, 7 or 8 people who've drawn Batman in the comics who've also drawn the Phantom. So that was something interesting to find out as I took over the strip. So I do that, and then I'm always doing other drawings. You see, my Instagram is always filled with art. I'm like an art making machine.
Oh, well, of course you are. and you know, it's funny to hold court and have your peer group be other professional artists. I mean, that's a trip in its own right, but it's wild for everybody to go, wow, I don't know how Mike does it. Well, we all do it, but we don't know how you do it. So,
you know, I mean, I think it's just hours. It's hours in the chair. It's the same thing you would tell a student. How do you do it? Well, can you sit down and work 8 hours straight? Can you work 10 hours, 12 hours? I mean, almost every cartoonist I know, especially those doing strips or doing monthly books, if you're not putting in 10, 12 hours a day, you're not probably going to be able to get the amount of work done. And so then your speed comes from your confidence. Your confidence comes from putting the time in. It's like it's all stitched together. You know, there's no paint bucket saves you 30 seconds of filling with a brush. You know?
Right. Yeah.
Do you guys think about that? Like, I think about that all the time. Like, if I can save 30 seconds with this one thing over the course of a year, I'm going to buy myself a day.
Yeah.
I do think about that stuff. I don't get very far with it, but I think about it.
I mean, I will say that because right now I'm working completely digitally. It's faster. I'm faster inking digitally than I am inking traditionally. Although I prefer having an original, you know, as opposed to this digital copy. Who knows what'll happen 10, 20 years from now? They you know, who knows what'll happen? You know, you might not even be able to read that Photoshop file anymore. You know, you're going to constantly have to be. In fact, that's something I have to do now. I have a bunch of old files. They're on zips and stuff like that. And
your side quests, yeah.
You know, I finally threw my side quests away years ago.
No, it's going to come back. I swear.
They're
going to come back.
A garbage can full of side quests. But I have a bunch of like my original Action Planet stuff, and just a bunch of art that I've done that's over the years. It's on the zip and the jazz drives. So I need to send those off and have that stuff transferred, as well as anything that's actually on DVD, because that stuff's not, you know, it's slowly moving its way to the point where there won't even be a company that can recover it.
Yeah,
right. I have an old laptop that runs an old Mac laptop that's old enough to run an older emulator, so I can get my Macromedia freehand files off of there. It's a mess. It's a real mess.
Right, and that's something that nobody really told you about, because you know, we all were sort of in a way forced to switch over to the digital thing. But I remember buying my first Mac 1994, and no one was saying, well, you know, in 3 years that thing that you have, no, done, right? Oh, that optical drive you bought, done, right? Oh, the floppy disk. I mean, the floppy disks went right away, right? And then the side quests were kind of janky anyway, because they were always like, it always felt like it was something inside a shoebox. Like, what's in there?
It's a magic 8-ball.
Right. Yeah. And anything that spins dies. That's basically.
You heard it here first.
You know, anything that spins dies. And you know, solid state, but even solid state fails. So it's like, do we all have to get to the point where it's like everything you do is like on the cloud, and then the cloud is backed up in more than one spot in case that cloud gets kind of, you know, it's like you're doing hours, years worth of work, and you know. What was it? There was that Sony fire, remember, like 3 or 4 or 5 years ago? A Sony fire that burned up all the master tapes of a lot of artists and stuff like that.
I do remember that, yeah.
So you really worry about, like, you know, longevity of your life's work, you know.
Well, Mike, you know, to hit the ball back across the net, and this is interesting. I remember maybe it was 15 years ago when all of a sudden, like, external space, or even just like hard drive space, has gotten a lot cheaper and easier to access. Like, I remember when you could only get a external drive that was so big. And then remember the Drobo, like people were making their personal racks in their studio where you just put all these externals that you just stole from other places. But it seems like people don't need all that anymore. And I guess maybe you can buy a 6 terabyte hard drive from Staples, and it seems like there's bigger things, but doesn't necessarily mean they're more stable. They're just bigger.
Well, right. I mean, because the fact is that you have to have multiple redundancy. Now, I mean, you imagine someplace like Disney, which is just generating how much data in a day, right? You know, some place like that's generating how much data, or Lucasfilm, how much data in a day are they generating, making, you know, effects and processing sound and, everything else. And then that stuff has to be backed up. But I imagine it has to be backed up more than once, maybe even more than twice. And unlike big multinational corporations that are worth, zillions of dollars, it's just me, right? And so I have to going by putting stuff over here, taking stuff over here. Oh, there's a new update on this thing. Oh, damn it! Just now, I make sure all my automatic updates are turned off, because you don't want overnight.
Everybody's shaking their head.
Right, comes on and you go to use your tablet or whatever the next day, and all of a sudden what's going on here?
Yeah. I survived turning in my last book when my tablet went down, and luckily I had a backup, but it was some sort of driver drama that I could not. You don't want to mess with that stuff. I just jumped to the next thing, because you could spend a week fiddling with things and making it worse when you're under duress as it is.
Yeah. So there's this whole other level of complexity that you have to take into consideration, but also maintain, and then also stay on top of. I mean, I know most artists try to avoid updating. I mean, Steve, you do a lot of website stuff, so you basically have to update things, right? I mean,
not well. There's a lot more WordPress. We urge people to hold off on major updates until the plugins are all caught up, things like that. Or it's a big security risk on one. If anyone uses Elementor, which is a big WYSIWYG page layout program. No, sorry, it's a plugin for WordPress, but it's a page layout for WordPress, and there's a big security problem with it right now. That stuff's always happening. So you got to stay on top of it, but not upgrade too fast, or find yourself with a dead site. But compared to the other problems,
so what happens? The robots come in and start putting porn all over your site or something?
Well, it's the bigger problem is that someone will get into the website, and once they're into the website, then they have access to everyone. And most people have a shared hosting environment. It's not like when you host a website, it's not like here's your dedicated box on the rack. It's like you're sharing a pool with a lot of other people. And if somebody gets into one, they can get access to everything. It's it's just one person gets in, everything gets messed up. And so, and the worst part is, how old is your backup? Does your backup have that backdoor in it that people? Anyway, it's
wow.
It's a good website.
All right, we're getting in the weeds. Let's get out of the jungle here.
I felt like, oh no, we're veering.
The chat is banging on the table. They want to see Chris. So let's do some intros. We have a fantastic guest for you guys tonight. Chris Sotomayor. I think I took the rolling R off of that. I hope that's better. Is in the green room. And Mike, why don't you do the intros for Chris?
Well, I would say, I was telling him right before we went on, is that two of my favorite coloring jobs ever were done by Chris. And tying into what we were talking about, the revolution of color in comics and the production of comics took place along with all this digital stuff. So it's great to we want to pick his brain about going from the old world into the new world, and how that has affected his job as a colorist. So why don't we bring him in and he can tell us all about it?
All right. Hold on, I'm not ready. I gotta get the Grundlefly machine together. All right, give me 1 second. All right, everybody, welcome to Pencil to Pencil. Chris Sotomayor. Look at it. I got him. There it is.
Wow.
I was really enjoying that conversation
Because
I felt it in my heart. All the old tech and stuff.
Yeah, you can curse. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, good. Because I found a SCSI Terminator in a file cabinet just a couple of weeks ago.
Nice.
And I was like, what the hell is this? And I had completely forgotten what it was. And then I remembered I have an old scanner in my crawl space upstairs.
You know what? It's funny. For some reason I had my first my first major purchase was like the big boy scanner.
Right.
It was like it was the size of a table,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it was all, I think it was SCSI,
Yeah.
and it just like my computers outgrew the tech to
Yep.
that scanner. I miss that scanner.
Yep. I have an Epson 9600 XL
Yes.
upstairs in a crawl space. I got to get an adapter.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of what was it, FireWire?
Oh yeah.
It's SCSI, then FireWire, and I guess I don't know what's now. Is it just USB-C?
I mean, yeah. Now USB-C is the big thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or Wi-Fi.
I don't trust that, but
Or Bluetooth. Yeah.
so Mike, why don't you get us started here? And before that, I just want to give some notes to anybody that's watching for the first time to the live stream. This is open to your questions. So if you have a question for Chris or one of the co-hosts, please ask. I cannot guarantee it'll get on, so try to keep it on topic and make them good questions, and we'll do our best. All right, Mike, you have the floor.
Okay. Well, great to have you on, Chris. And
Glad to
like
be
we were talking right before we went live, I think that would be really a great thing to discuss, going from the old version of coloring, which you started in, to the new version of coloring, and how that machine just keeps churning and churning, and maybe give us a little bit of your schooling and how you learned color, or who were the people that inspired you, the colorists in the business.
I mean, I learned color from the people who I was surrounded with in the studio that I came up in, right? I interned in a studio called Bad Boy Studios that Michael Davis ran. He was a founder of Milestone. And Dennis Cowan had introduced me to him when I was like a kid. I was just going into art school. So I interned in the studio that had like Bernard Chang, John Paul Leon, Sean Martinborough, all these guys in there. And I learned color from those guys. They helped me understand it better. I got my first taste of what blue line color looked like in that studio. And that kind of set me off. That combined with, I'm a comic book fan, like everyone, right? So I saw Electra Lives Again, and I was like, holy shit, I maybe I want to color. And then being in the studio was it for me, then understanding it, the mechanics of it, the process of it, it just all kind of came together. And I think that's when I fell in love with it. But, I got started doing color guides for my first book. Doing color guides was for a publisher called Triumphant that doesn't exist anymore. And they were doing these like super collectible things, these comics with serial numbers scrolled on the top. It's a weird thing, but it was a job. So that was my first taste into actually doing color for publication and understanding that. And it kind of snowballed from there. I learned digital color from a bunch of people, really. J.D. Smith at Top Cow taught me a lot of stuff, probably more than anyone. Michelle Wolfson, who was at Electric Crayon for a while. Clydeen Nee. I learned about coloring from her. I learned, so much about the process that I didn't understand coming in, because when I started to do digital color, I had to hit the ground running, right? It was for a job that I was doing 9 to 5 in an office, and I was responsible for coloring a bunch of books, and I had no idea what the hell I was doing, and no one had any idea what the hell I was supposed to do. So I had to figure it out, or I lost my job. It was a sink or swim situation. And so I just started picking people's brains and calling on the phone and sneaking into offices and all kinds of shit. And it kind of, I pieced together more or less what I was supposed to be doing. And we managed to get some books out, which was, I don't even understand how we did that. But
so what year are we talking about? And I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into the the
Well-
beginning of it, like how you know.
Yeah, it was about, I want to say 93 when I first did the triumphant job. And then I was working that 9 to 5 office job about 94 to 96. And that was another venture that Michael Davis kind of went into with Motown Records.
Mhm.
And it was a production of a line of books that was supposed to be R&D for IPs, right? So we were just supposed to develop all these properties through comic books, and then Motown would kind of exploit those properties for animation and film and all these things that never really happened, but it was a nice premise at the time. So that was my office job. I was color editor and special projects editor, not really understanding how to color digitally. Probably not the best person for the job, but I had enthusiasm for the job, and I figured all of that out. That was in 96. That was up until 96. And then after that, I went freelance and jumped in at Marvel doing color guides for Deadpool, Journey into Mystery featuring Shang-Chi and Captain America.
So you did traditional, then digital, and then sort
And then
of
back to traditional, yeah.
right.
Well, because in 96, Marvel still had a contract in place with Graphic Color World, which was a digital separator in Ireland, I believe. So they were still using color guide artists and then sending those color guides to whoever, and then they were interpreting the color guides there, and then they'd go back to Marvel, those files, and then they'd get printed. It was a real kind of, if you could figure out the longest process to do it, that's what they were doing. It was so inefficient. And
Right.
and it got to the point I was so frustrated. Like I was doing color guides with Doc Martens and Prismacolor markers and pencils and anything that I could make a mark with. But I got so frustrated with what I was doing and what I was getting back from the separators, who really, I think a lot of them didn't understand color, like color theory and just how to interpret stuff properly. So I was so upset with that stuff that I wound up doing digital color guides just to prove to Marvel that I could do it if you let me, and I can do it in the time that it would take you to get the books color guided, and they'll look better if I do it, but you guys want to dick around. So go ahead. So I would do digital color guides, which is me pretty much coloring each page. And I did this on Deadpool. I wouldn't do it on a team book, but I would do digital color guides and then print them out and then hand the printouts to my editor.
Wow. I mean, it's like you're going back and forth between all these different worlds. And that's a really fascinating time in comics, because comics was sort of like the last man standing in a way to convert to all the new tech. They had everything set up to work the way it had always worked. And I always thought there were certain artists who could, using that old system, get great colors, like Tom Palmer, Neil Adams, Klaus Janson. There were certain artists, because they understood color, could work with that more limited palette, but still get amazing results, as opposed to a lot of stuff you get in the old days, and it's like, okay, we got 7 people got to color this comic because it's got to go,
Right.
and it's like the Crayola 8, like
Many hands, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I was the guy at Marvel who would just say yes to any deadline. So I would always make sure that I could do anything they needed whenever they needed it done. And I would say yes, and then just figure out how to get it done, even though I had no idea if I could get it done. I mean, the first job I did color guides for was I picked up the pages on Friday, and then I had to turn them in Monday. So I issue a Deadpool, right? It's like issue 4 or something, or 6, whatever it was. And I'm sitting there in my friend's apartment because I had just moved back from LA to New York. And I'm sitting there with my Prismacolor markers and some colored pencils, and I'm working away and just trying to figure out how am I going to get my first Marvel job done in these 2.5 days, so that I could get more jobs. Because
Right.
I mean,
Right.
you do the job, and if it's good enough, you get more jobs. You don't do a job and then it sucks and then they hire you. It's got to look somewhat decent.
Right.
It can't just be on time. It's
That was your first Marvel job?
yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah, that was my first Marvel job for interiors. My first Marvel job before that was 2 covers for X-Men Untold Tales.
Right.
Yeah.
And then when you did the guide, I know you have an example there. Maybe you can show it.
Yeah.
You also have to do the code,
Yes.
right? So you have all the little markups that tells them like the Human Torch or whoever is like 100% yellow and 100% red, and
Right. Coding wasn't even that big a deal in the late 90s as they were phasing it out because they were handing it to people. It wasn't cutting film anymore, for 25% increments. It was more like them just sending the guides to someone to figure out, what kind of blue could that be, and all that. So the codes I was doing was mostly for effects and like gradients. Like they would fuck up gradients all the time, and it would really drive me nuts.
I love it.
Yeah, but that's why I started doing digital guides, because they were screwing up everything. They were screwing up gradients and rendering, and like even the colors I was trying to get, they couldn't do. So I just started doing digital guides, and it worked out so much better. Well, for me, it worked out better.
Chris, at this point, like, what year are we talking about?
That was 97 to want to say about 99.
So tell us what your digital loadout was in 1997. Is that like Photoshop 3 or something like that? What do you got? What's under the hood there?
I think it was Photoshop 3 on a Quadra 8100.
Yo.
Yeah, with a zip disk drive. Not an internal zip disk drive. I couldn't get that. I couldn't run that. I had the external zip disk drive. They were better than floppies. Like you said, there's something, they're like little monkeys or some shit banging around in there, always screwing up files.
And Chris, did you have a stylus, or were you using the mouse at some point?
That's a smart question, because I was using a mouse in the beginning, which is like drawing with a potato. Yeah, I hated that, but it was the only way that I could make a selection, a full selection, and then everything was just select and gradient. So there was no airbrushing for me or anything. It was just select, gradient, select, gradient. It was just drawn, pull, over and over. But yeah,
man. I'm smiling because it's like, I think, as we're having our old man flashback, I think we kind of leave out how quickly tech advanced. Now everybody's got a giant Cintiq in their studio, but like back then, if you had like a stylus, you were ahead of the game.
Yeah,
well, even just being able to afford to have the Wacom, right? Because not every,
and it wasn't like it was a monitor that you could touch. It was a sturdy mouse pad that you drew on somewhere over here, far away from the screen.
Right. Yeah. It was it was not fun back then. I much prefer my setup now with the Cintiq and the keyboard, and I still use a keyboard. I'm old school like that. Some people use that little like that gaming thing.
Like the toggle guys.
Yeah, I don't like that. I still need to hit that space bar with my thumb. I need to feel that key.
Well, this is also in a time when sending files, like they had to get a T1 line, all these kinds of things, right?
Oh, let me tell you. Number one, I would walk in my zip disks into the Marvel offices. That's when you could actually go up and have conversations with people. Or back in about 2000, I was doing stuff for Marvel Knights. I was doing Black Panther, Mike.
Oh yeah.
And I remember setting that up on my computer. Then I had a Power Mac. I was upgraded by then. I remember setting up my computer at like 9 at night so that it could transfer all the files over by email, one page at a time, and it would just go all night. And I would go to sleep and just hope in my dreams that the line didn't get disconnected or the signal didn't drop, and that all the files made it over. And I'd get up at like 6 to double check. And if the connection got disrupted, I'd have to go and set up all those files again, or at least the ones that I know didn't make it through, and just send them all in, in like the 2 or 3 hours I had before I needed to start working.
And that's back when, like a lot of readers don't know, like the traditional deadline was you had to have something shipping to the printer 12 weeks before it appeared on the newsstand.
Right.
Right. And when I first started at Marvel, and I remember at DC, when you hit anything under 12 weeks, you were on the hot list.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I think some of the last jobs I did, you would turn it in on a Tuesday, and the next Wednesday it's like being printed. So, I mean, everything has so changed. Even the fact, I was thinking the other day, now we all do this thing, you look at you can draw on your Wacom,
right,
or on your Cintiq, but you can also draw and look at the screen. And we were probably the first generation of artists who did that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I remember my first Wacom tablet that I could sit and just like draw, on the side and still look at the screen. And the first time I got a Cintiq, Wacom actually sent a sales rep to my house because Dan Carr at Marvel, bless his heart, he told them, if you want someone to test drive this thing, you bring it out to this guy. So the sales rep came out to my house, knocked on my door and said, here, try this. And I fell in love. I didn't want to give it back. He let me have it for 10 days. And I'm coloring Hulk pages on there. And I was like, no, mine. And it was the most amazing thing.
So did you buy it? Did he say, well, you can keep it and pay us monthly installments? Or
yeah. And I wound up buying one like right after he left. I was like, shit, I need it. It's too good to not have. I was drawing faster. I was coloring faster. It was more comfortable to work. So it was taking the strain off my back and my shoulder. Because a lot of people don't realize this, that tablet, that Wacom tablet that you would keep on the desk and then look at your screen while you're coloring or using it. If it's too big, you're making too big a motion and it can put some strain on your shoulder. But if it's too small, then you start getting cramps in your wrist or in your hand.
Right.
So you had to find like the right one for you. Yeah. So I had like the 9x12. I felt was good. Like that was a decent size. Yeah. But having the Cintiq, at that time, I think it was like a 21-inch Cintiq. Like that was a game changer for me. And this was technology I needed to have. So now I'm on I bought a 21-inch wide at that point. As soon as they introduced it, I was like, yeah, widescreen, give me the real estate. And then I'm on my second one now. And that was about 15 years ago.
And what gave out on your old one? Was the tech just kind of failing?
It was the power supply and the cables. Just the cables in general. Just had a lot of wear.
Yeah, their cables are always like wiggly, and then they end up.
Yeah, yeah. And I have it on an arm that I can shift around and spin.
Yeah.
Sorry, everybody.
That was my next question. Yeah. Because a lot of the Wacoms, when they come out of the box, they may have that little kickstand. And that ruins you.
Yeah. Yeah. Those suck. They're awesome in theory.
Yeah.
But in practice, when you're sitting for like 10 hours a day, you can't put those hours in on that thing. So I got this floating arm that I adjust, I pick it up, I flip it, you know, I lean back in my chair sometimes and,
Hmm.
you know, it's great because I can shift myself.
Chris,
So
have you ever? I'm sorry, Mike. One quick little thing. First, have you ever worked standing up?
I did a couple of times out of necessity because
Yeah,
I had a leg injury,
yeah,
but yeah, that's about it. It's hard to do standing up.
yeah. Okay, Mike, you have the floor.
I was just going to say, how, like what's your average day? Is your average day as long as it used to be, or is it different now because of the advancing of the the technology?
Uh, I get way more done now. I think it's I think it's because of the technology that I can get more done now. I still put in the same amount of hours, but I'm more productive with my time. I can bang out more pages.
Mhm,
But that's because of technology. And I mean, you know, you put in hours and hours and hours and you get it, the job gets easier in a lot of ways. So I can make decisions faster. I know how to shave seconds, like 30 seconds here and there, like Steve was saying before.
mhm.
You know, I live by shaving seconds off whatever I'm working on because it makes sense. Because if I could shave enough seconds, I could sneak in an extra page.
Mhm.
And do
You
you
know,
use flatters? Because that's the other thing
yeah,
that's like a whole new
yeah.
thing.
I was flatting my own stuff back in, you know, up until about 2000. And then after that, I was just like, you know what? I could squeeze in a whole nother book if I just hire a flatter to just flat my pages for me. So it just made financial sense. And I mean, it's a business, right? So you got to figure out, you know, how you can shave things here, save there, add there, you know, whatever makes sense for your business. You gotta consider all that stuff. So it was a no brainer for me.
Chris, I have a question about. I was thinking about the value. What is it? The value triangle. It's like good, fast, cheap. You can
Right,
only pick two. That whole thing.
right.
But I was wondering about, and this maybe will be a longer question about how, if you could maybe speak to how, if you believe color theory has changed, or maybe popular coloring has changed over the decades. Because I believe there were like styles or maybe eras of color you would see in comics, and kind of to where we are now.
Yeah, there are definitely different errors in coloring, like different trends that you can pick up on,
Hmm.
and you can see like I mean, you can just see what's popular, right?
Right. Right.
I think for a while there was a spot in digital coloring when it was just like just get the colors down and make one thing a different color from the other.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the move just because it was digital coloring and you could get away with it. You didn't really need to understand, you know, pacing, uh, lighting hierarchies, you know, how to use color theory to manipulate the mood in the reader, you know, things like that. It was just get some colors down, make it look, you know, splashy, make it look fresh, and then on to the next page or on to the next book.
Hmm.
I think now, especially nowadays, but I think in the last maybe 20 years, 15, let's say 15 years, there has been a bigger push for artists to use color and to color their own stuff and for artists to come in as colorists on projects. Um, and they know their shit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know I went through a phase and I've looked back recently at some of my older stuff just because I had a really good day and I needed to take myself down a couple of notches. So I look back at some of my older stuff and I was like, shit, what the hell was I thinking? Because I would so not do things now the way I did them back then. And I know
Mhm.
I fell into that trap where you're just trying to flip pages and you know make a living, right? I'm way more concerned now with the kind of work I do. And I think a lot of people are like that now, where they're going back and they're using color theory a lot more. They're really understanding it better. And it takes some re-educating yourself to break old habits, right? So I mean, I teach all this stuff in a class, and luckily when I teach it, I get to kind of, you know, reaffirm these things for myself.
Yeah.
So I get to go over these things and kind of strengthen my foundation while I'm helping others strengthen theirs at the same time. So yeah, I think that's been important for me in my growth.
Mhm.
And I try as much as I can. But you can tell when I mean, I don't hopefully people can tell. I don't know. I can tell when people are coming in and they're not really understanding color theory because you'll see them use the same colors all the time.
Mhm.
You know, you'll see like I had one client come to me and they were complaining that their colorist on their book was using all this purple on every page for every scene across 36 pages.
Mhm.
And I was like, you shitting me. He sends me a PDF of the book and holy cow, I couldn't believe that it was 36 pages of purple on every page in every scene. You couldn't tell the scene shifts. You couldn't tell when lighting was different. It was the same intensity highlights, you know, top to bottom, all over the place, everything flattened out. And it's just, you know, these are fundamentals. You got to know how to tell a story. You got to know, you know, what colors are doing what color combinations are doing what. You know, when you want to excite a scene, use complements. When you want to cool stuff down, you know,
Mhm.
use an analogous cool scheme or something like that. But yeah, this guy was just purple all the way through.
He was trying to get that Grimace graphic novel off the ground.
He did the lighting. We brought him for Jamar's lighting.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the things would draw, you know, bad inking and bad coloring
Yeah.
drives artists crazy because, like you said, I always think, especially now, the coloring can so overpower everything. It can go against the lighting and the mood that you know, that the penciler and the inker do. And there was I guess sort of like when Image came in, it was sort of like throw everything in the kitchen sink sort of in. There was like everybody had lots of highlights on them. It was almost like the lens flare, you know,
Yeah.
like
Underlighting everywhere. Yeah.
yeah. And then, you know, but then you would look at something like Hellboy, and it's very played down.
Yeah.
And it's very uh it's perfect for, I forget the guy's name. I'm spacing on the colorist's name now.
Dave Stewart.
Dave Stewart.
Chiarello? Oh, okay.
No, it's Dave Stewart.
Sure.
It's perfect for Mike, because if you did that sort of like lens flare 1,000 highlights on his work, it would destroy it. It would destroy
Yeah.
the mood. So I'm sort of interested in the process of what you were talking about, the colorists becoming much more sophisticated and knowledgeable about coloring, almost like a cinematographer or a lighter. How you light a movie can totally affect the lens that you use, totally affects the mood. And when I started, you know, you got it in. If the book was tight, like I said, they just passed out pages. Nobody was really paying attention. Maybe the editor would say, "Oh, you got to make sure that this guy's always blue," or
Right.
or whatever. Um, but there definitely seemed like you and Laura Martin and there's other colorists where they're really thinking completely different than they were, like you said, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of it also has to do with, well, with the technology. It's a lot easier to find reference now. It's a lot easier to go through movies and pull stills of things that'll give you ideas and palettes and stuff. So I've gotten used to doing that myself. I find it very helpful for lighting schemes to go look at movies and just pause it, be like, hey, that looks really nice. Let me see if I can do something like that. And I mean, I know things in film don't always translate to comics. Like it's two different worlds. But if you know how to compensate for that, like you can't go like film, TV, all that stuff is based on movement, right? So your eye is going to track the thing that moves. In comics, you don't have that luxury, so you got to figure out exactly what it is your focal point is and treat it like it's the moving object. So you kind of bring all the focus into that thing, right? So you got to understand how to interpret, the film stuff or TV stuff into comics. So you can't go so dark. Maybe you go cooler, or maybe you go blue, right? Or maybe you go desaturated. You bring that color down, or shift in temperature, something like that. That's really it's that interpretation that's really going to help understand your reference. But I know that's been a lot easier for a lot of people to help them with their work. I mean, shit, just painting and looking at artists, and it's so much easier to look at artist work that you like. It's like now I can go online and pull up, Bob Peak, J.C. Landecker, Bernie Fuchs paintings, Romare Bearden, uh, all these artists that I like, Thomas Blackshear.
Right.
I can pull up all those JPEGs and be like, oh, that's how he solved that problem. Or I love that lighting. Let me see if I can do something like that. It's a lot easier to do that now than back in the day when I'd have to take my ass down to the library, and go through encyclopedias and art books and shit.
True. And then the other thing is that understanding RGB versus CMYK, because everything was CMYK, and now everything is RGB but converted to CMYK. So you have a whole other technical process of like, oh, I like this color scheme, but when I go from RGB to CMYK, like my yellows are turning green, or things like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I actually talk to my students about that too, because it's funny, the yellows turning greens, when you mix, I think it's that ivory black paint into that cadmium yellow, you get that shift. It turns
Right.
green. It's that same kind of thing, but on the computer. Like so much of this stuff that works in traditional media and in a tangible form is stuff that happens digitally too, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, number one, you got to make sure you have your preview set on, right? And you can do that in Photoshop, which is awesome. So I have my CMYK preview on all the time. And also my palettes that I use, I know what they look like when they print each color. And I've got a huge palette that I've just built on over the years. It's my palette from 1994, but then every new color ever that I liked and saved, or set of colors after that. And the joke is in my class that I can't delete just one of them, because then everything shifts over by one, and then I don't know where anything is. So I have to keep it because I know what all those colors print like. I know what they look like in CMYK. And if I forget to turn my preview on, it's okay, because if I use all the colors that are in my swatches in my palette, then I know that when I switch from RGB to CMYK, it's going to look the same anyway.
Right.
That's great.
Right.
Well, we've got a bunch of questions in chat. This is fantastic. This one seems like a perfect starter. Sherry on Facebook. Hey, Sherry. Where can someone learn to color? It seems like you want to hold your shirt up, like.
Right. Oh,
Oh,
I forget it's mirrored. There you go. There we
there
go.
it is.
Yeah. Yeah, so I teach online classes at comicsexperience.com, and there's a courses tab, under the art section. And I teach intro courses twice a year, usually once in the winter at the beginning of the year and once in the fall, just like a school semester. Yeah, and course runs for 6 weeks. It also spins into an advanced class if you feel like taking it. But I design the classes so that you can come out of the intro class understanding everything you need to know. You get a really good foundation. And with me, it's not about upselling to the advanced class, because I want people to walk away from the intro class knowing everything they would need to know, having a good understanding of storytelling, color theory, composition through color, pacing, all that stuff. And they come out with pages that they can use in a portfolio. They get a ton of materials from me, donated by Marvel, DC, Valiant, Image, like all the big publishers have donated artwork so that I could use in the class. And they get real world instruction. I break it down in the intro class. It's broken down into color usage and lighting, which are really the two biggest aspects of color. And then in the advanced class, which I'm teaching now, and that's a 7-week course, I break it down into customizations, different lighting types, color dynamics, structure of anatomy. There's a lot more drawing involved in the advanced class because you really have to understand like the planes of the human body and the head, to be able to do these things convincingly. So it's a lot more fine-tuned. It's a lot more noodling and stuff like that. But I love teaching the class. I've been doing it for, I don't know, 15, 20 years maybe.
Wow.
It's been a while. I've been doing it for a while. Yeah.
Cool. I have a question on Facebook. When you teach, what's the biggest aha moment that your students experience?
It is right after I finished the week 2 lesson, which is all about color theory, because it's my favorite class to teach. And I do it right at the beginning, right? The first week we do all the technical shit because I don't like any of that stuff. So we bang it right out in week 1, and then they turn in their homework, and then we're good to go. After that is all the art stuff, right? So week 2, we dive into color theory. And right after I finish that lesson, everyone goes, wow. They love the class. They love the color theory discussion. It's my favorite one to teach. Everything just starts clicking. And then they start to understand what color can really do for a story.
That's, and I think, and then we've got another question here about teaching from Tim Fielder on Facebook. Hi, Chris. How would you rate present day training for coloring these days? Do you think it seems easier than ever?
I think finding the information is easy. Parsing good info from bad info, just like anything else, is really the challenge. So I would suggest, I'm not going to hype my class at every turn, but I would suggest going in and trying to find consistency in the information that you're looking for. It's kind of like when you go for a portfolio review, right? You hit up 10 people, ask them to look at your work, and whatever comes up consistently across those 10 people, that's the stuff you take and you work on that, right? So whatever consistent information you find, that's probably the information you want to hold on to and try to work that into your own work. But as far as resources, it's easier than ever to find resources to get information. It just depends on like how you learn, what kind of material you can practice on. Because if you practice on crappy line art, your colors aren't going to look that great because you're not going to know what to do. It's really a good idea to find, top quality line art, the best line art you can find to practice on. Because then, it's just structured better, it's paced better, it's composed better. And that gives you the opportunity to do everything in color that you would need to do.
Chris, I have a question on teaching color. How hard is it to maybe break bad habits from your students, who I'm sure you're basically training people how to see differently? And I guess if you think in primary colors, it's like, wow, you have all this in front of you. How do you figure that out with the students?
I mean, it's tough. You get into a classroom, everyone works differently. They're individuals, and I try to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
One of the things I tell them right from the get-go in that first week, I tell them, your work is not precious, and I'm going to be painting over it like crazy. So don't get offended. It's not a critique on you as a person. Right. It's a critique on your work, and we're going to make you better. Which is what I went through in that studio I came up in. My boss and the other artists in there, they would start marking up and redrawing my shit all the time. And what was I going to do? I'm going to get my feelings hurt every time. I'd be a mess.
Right.
You learn to take the critique.
I want to put some of your artwork on the screen, but I have one other question is, I think it just fell out of my head. I was on such a roll. This was it. So kind of like coming from the era of having like, a complete set of Prismacolors in your studio to now like having, the first time you see that Photoshop swatch with all or the color, ball, it's just like, yo, I could press any button in any color. I could do anything. Like, is that also something you deal with in your class where there's like maybe
Too many options.
too many options? Yeah, does that happen too?
Yeah, I definitely streamline it down because I don't want anyone distracted by all these other things, all these bells and whistles, right?
Right.
So in Photoshop and Clip and whatever program people use, there's all these different color blending modes and different ways to paint that, you could cheat highlights and all that shit.
Yeah.
And I tell them, you could do that if you want. And, maybe I won't know when you hand in your homework, but don't do the color math. Don't let the computer do the color math for you. Just work in normal mode and try to work your colors so that you have control over what they look like.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let the program decide what your colors look like. Don't try to do the math in your head and figure, oh, if I put this color on this color in screen mode, I'll get this color. No one's got time for that. It's all bullshit.
Yo, but what about Gaussian blur? I gotta get it in. It's calling my name, Chris.
I hate those fucking blurs. And that's a great example of something that works great in film for what it is, but doesn't really translate in comics that well. Like, you got to be really careful with that, because when you blur something, my attention goes right to the blurred thing, and it moves me from what the thing is that I'm supposed to look at. So it has the complete opposite effect.
Color dodge. Color dodge. I love it. All right, let's put some of your artwork on the screen. Why don't we? Hold on one second. And guys, thanks so much in the chat for being so lively. The questions are great. Keep them coming. All right, let's see. What do we have here? Oh, this looks familiar, Mike Manley.
Look at that.
Yeah. That is the splash to the 30th anniversary of Dark Hawk, Heart of the Hawk.
If Marvel ever wanted to remaster the old series, I would be all over coloring that.
Oh, I would love that, because the color really varied widely. In fact, I remember one time the deadline was so tight, I had to drive from Philadelphia up to deliver the pages, I think in Jersey City, to Joe Rosas, to his house, so that he could turn it in. Like, I drove up on a Saturday or a Friday, So, I mean, this is like, emergency, all hands on deck. But I love this. I also love the fact that there's so many great combinations of warm and cool neutral colors, which in painting is something that, as they say, is the sort of the soup of painting. That the two jobs I worked with you on, for sure, the Justice League International, and this were my favorite, my favorite color jobs.
Thank you.
Chris, anything to add to this Dark Hawk piece on your end? Like maybe it would be great if maybe you could kind of talk us through some of your ideas going into a black and white piece of line art like this. Like, what are you trying to get over in a piece like this?
Listen, my thing with Dark Hawk was always, that's a cool costume, right? I always loved the costume. I thought just design-wise, it worked really well, and as an element, it was great because it's black, it's reflective, it's chrome. Like, you could do all kinds of things in there with color temperature, and as long as it still reads as black and chrome, like, you're good, right? So you can get really creative with the environment. You could get really creative with the figure work itself, and the design of the costume. And I've always just liked that. I mean, number one, the drawings are structured so that there's weight in there already, and it's really just up to me to not fuck it up, right? So, and that's the kind of stuff I love. I love drawings with great structure. That's why I love like Gary Frank and Mike Diodato and so many of these guys. They have great structure to their drawings, and I'm all for it.
Yeah, and I love how like the key lighting, like under his feet, you see it's like it goes from light to dark. You see a lot of light to dark, so you're aware of light falling off, right?
Right. Thank you.
Which is something you get in New York City.
Yes.
You get that light striking and falling off. So I just thought that was just fantastic.
I love that subtle splatter texture for the buildings at the bottom. Like I could immediately imagine somebody getting there. And it's like, I'm going to paint every brick in, I'm going to, with that texture kind of gives you all that without having to,
right. Exactly. That was my idea behind using that texture, because it marries everything as an element and it gives you all the information you need for storytelling purposes. And it doesn't bog it down. Like you see the character, you see the gargoyle structure that he's on, and then there's the environment. And hopefully when I do my job right, that's what I'm aiming to do. The figure, all the important stuff, and then the environment that thing lives in.
Awesome. Oh, some hardware.
That's Dennis, right?
Yeah, Dennis Cowan. I love working with Dennis. Dennis gives me a lot of freedom, a lot of room to be as creative as I want. I know what he likes. He's comfortable with what I do. And then like I'm a big fan of everyone I'm fortunate enough to work with. Like, I've been reading Dennis's stuff since Power Man and Iron Fist and Dr. Zero and The Question and all that stuff. So
that's cool.
Yeah, and his work is very textural, so maybe we can touch on that a little bit too. Like textural work versus say something like Mignola, which is very open, right? So do you adjust your, you have to think about, well, if I put too much stuff on the line art, then I'm not going to see it.
Right.
So what do you think? What are the first things that go through your head when you look at a particular artist style like Dennis or mine or Mignola or whoever?
I mean, first thing I look at is what do I want the reader or the viewer to see first, right? I make that my focal point and I pull everything else back out of that. With Dennis's stuff, I know that I can go in and continue what he's done in the drawing, and everything I do, I try to pay respect to the drawing that my color is living underneath, right? So I never go super dark on anything so you can't see the ink line, because I love all the lines and I try to be very respectful of that. And like I said, I tend to be a fan of almost every artist I work with. So, I like seeing these drawings. Yeah, I get a kick out of that. And I want to be part of it. I don't want it to be, I don't want my stuff to be the thing. I want to be part of this whole thing, right? I love the collaboration. So whatever Dennis puts down, I know that I can take what he's done and start expanding on it. Like, there's a lot of line work and mark making that I'm doing in those spaces with my brush tools.
Right.
And I'll use, textured brushes and other custom brushes in those spaces. And I'll start adding, different colors in there that maybe you wouldn't think of adding, like some reds in the faces or blues in the faces, things like that, just to kind of break up that surface scatter a little bit.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. So I'll just look at the line work that Dennis has in there, and I'll start using color to expand on what he has. And I think that at this point, Dennis's work and what I do with Dennis, I think it turns into a nice thing that looks like a bigger sum than the parts, right? I really think that we've got this look where it's just it all works together. Like I definitely don't try to fight anything he does, and I try to just work with the line art. So I know if he's got a lot of crazy cross hatching in there, like you can see in his chest piece, there's a lot of hatching.
Sorry, guys. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll expand what he's done in there, and I'll add in some cross hatching and just kind of flare it out a little bit and let it dissolve into the front of his chest piece. Pushing the hand in front where he's got that hand up,
Yeah.
you know, I'll add that little whitish highlight on top, you know, and just texture it up so that I can get that hand out in front of his body, you know.
That's good.
That's interesting. I also, and some of those glows, those glints that you put up above the line layer. How do you feel about those? Like that's definitely feels like an innovation since things went digital. The idea that you could add something above the ink.
Yeah. It's a nice thing. I try not to go too crazy on it. I know Dennis loves the effects when they're done tastefully. I love effects when they're done tastefully. I'll try not to add like something that looks canned. I'll try to like paint it in instead of using like a stamped brush. It looks like a star or something. I don't like that. A lot of times, even if I like, that's all a selection and then a little dab of the airbrush on that hook. Right. There's two selections and then a little dab.
The glints on the top of it's really nice.
Yeah. Thank you. But like even when I was doing Captain Marvel in 2000, right? And that was a book that was shot over pencils. And even before that, the figure itself, Captain Marvel as a figure, had a star field inside all the black areas in his body. Like the star field, I didn't like find a picture online and then copy and paste it in. I painted that star field and held on to that file, and then I would use that. Like everything I do, I try to create. I don't want to use, you know, if I use photos for clouds, I go out and I take the photos and then I put them in Photoshop and I start painting over them and, you know, messing them up a little bit. And I don't want it to look the same. I don't want it to look canned. You know, I want it to look like it belongs in the line art. And if you drop in a photo on top of like Dennis, for instance, that's going to look weird as hell.
Yeah.
So you can't do that. So I try to create everything that I use. You know,
a good question from YouTube just came in. EJB. It seems that many modern pencilers leave open areas in backgrounds. How often are you expected to paint in elements that weren't included in the line art? And if it's a sore topic, we can skip it.
It's not a sore topic. It's very cool. You know, I don't mind going in and creating shapes in those spaces. That's all fine for me. Maybe not so much when I'm crunching on a deadline, but you know, on covers and stuff, that stuff's to be expected sometimes. Or every once in a while, there's a blank panel of background, you know, and that's perfectly fine. I don't mind creating information in those spaces. It's not the worst thing I've had to do, and it can be fun.
And what about things like zipatone? Because like in the old days, sometimes that evidently was problematic for some colorists. Was, you know, like, well, what do I put underneath the zipatone? Didn't ever seem to be a problem for some people, but do you have any? Because it seems like it comes and goes. Like some people like zipatone, or they are using line screens more now. It's sort of the anime or, you know, manga sort of
right
effect.
In some of the books I do with Dennis, like the hardware series I was doing with him, I added zipatone. I like it. I think it can be a great tool. You know, I know that there were some colorists back in the day that had issues with zipatone, and you know, things would get murky. Number one, you don't go too heavy on areas with zipatone. You let the zipatone do the heavy lifting. It's already there, right? So don't fight what's there. it's okay to knock out Zipatone if you really want. If you really feel like putting in that time, go ahead and knock out the Zipatone. As long as you don't create a mask that draws the eye instead of telling the story.
Right.
Everything has to work in service to the story. If you're taking the reader out of that experience, then you failed your job.
Because like in the old days, I've done it a few times, probably really influenced by Klaus, what Klaus would do over Frank Miller. And he would do those fade zips like on the background. Then he would do those over as an overlay, so they would just print as a blue or whatever color. It was very effective and very graphic. So I guess you could do the same thing now, right? You would just select it on a layer.
Right. Yeah, I have a file that's just kind of a mishmash of Zipatone densities.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll usually load it as a selection and do some things in backgrounds. Sometimes I'll use that Zipatone as a selection to render on. So I'll add my highlights as Zipatone. And I find it opens up a whole nother set of options for me. And I like Zipatone. I hate that it went away for a while.
So, Chris, do you want to talk through some of these images that I've been showing?
Yeah, so this is from an Alien special that I did a few years back. Like right when Marvel first got the go ahead from Fox to start doing Alien content. I love that IP. Aliens is like the first movie just blew me away. It's my favorite movie. So I was really keen on doing this. And here, what I was trying to do was just, again, tone everything down so that when things go nuts, they look really nuts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I sent you page 1, and I think you have the second page too. So this one, everything starts really calm. There's not a whole lot of local color in here. It's all like, this is all just trying to get the feel of an Aliens thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want it to look bright. I don't want it to look garish. I don't want it to look like the grass is green and the sky is blue. That's what I mean by local color for people who don't. Right. So this is all just shades of gray, some warm grays, some cool grays. And then when things start going nuts, you hit that red button.
Oh, wait, hold on. I don't know where it is. I didn't keep them in order, but go ahead. Keep talking through this one.
Then the next scene goes into like this big red. And so you got a lot of hot and cool temperatures conflicting, contrasting with each other. And then that's when hopefully the reader realizes, things are getting serious and there's some panic going on. So I tried to do that here with color, just start everything off, in the first panel, we've got some ships and the color is very sparse, and second, third, fourth panels, color is still really sparse, no local color, just all grays, but it's gritty. There's texture in there. You really get a kind of Aliens kind of sense. And then things just go wacky and really intense. And that's when the action really starts.
And Chris, and I love that there's kind of like a, what do you call it? Like kind of like a static on the screen kind of.
Yes.
Like
yes.
Yeah, like scan lines going across the screen too. It's very subtle. I like that.
Another thing that I build, to put in there. Yeah.
Do you ever get the script, or do you sometimes not get the script? And you don't get the lettering. So
no lettering.
Yeah. So how do you? And sometimes I imagine you're getting pages in chunks, right?
Yes. I love getting the scripts. I usually get scripts. If I don't get a script, I'll ask for it. There was a book I was working on recently, an indie book with a friend of mine, where I wasn't getting the script at all. But the storytelling was so good, I didn't really need the script, and I got really close to what was going on in the script anyway, with the exception of a couple of minor things. But it really helps when I have the script, because then I can understand, how the story is playing out. And at the very least, I like to have the full script, not like the first half of a script or, the first 6 pages of a script. And my favorite is when I can work on pages in order, like when the inker sends me everything in order, and I can work on page 1, then page 2, then page 3, because I can get a better sense of how I want to pace my end of the story, and make sure that I hit and I leave room to hit all the big things that need to get hit, as the story progresses.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can find that other page. It didn't make my presentation, but I have it.
Well, we've got some questions while the behind the scenes magic's being done.
Yeah.
Bill on YouTube asks, what books or resources would Chris recommend on color theory?
Color and Light by James Gurney is a phenomenal book. It really breaks down color theory. It's exceptional. And oddly enough, framed ink is really great for understanding composition and shadows and how they work across the body and the face especially. I find those two to be really helpful. And framed ink is all about inking, right? But I mean, there's a lot to understand about inking that translates really well into color. I mean, it's a good idea to understand every aspect of the art in comics so that you can just build upon what's come before you, right?
Right.
That's great.
Yeah.
We do have a shout out here. I want to make sure you see this. Joseph Village, good to see you on YouTube. Comes in. Chris Sotomayor in the house. Put respect on this man's name. He fought for colorist rights and is an unsung hero.
I love Joe.
That is amazing.
Joe's awesome.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Steve. Yeah, I got it. But go ahead, Steve. Do you last question?
Well, we have another couple more questions. We have actually a ton of wonderful questions here. James on the YouTube asks about the printers and printing process changing a lot and how that might have affected you. So it's not just the part about the getting it to the printer, but now that the printers are different, what are you dealing with?
I mean, in some ways it's gotten better, right? I remember very early on having to worry about things printing off register.
Right.
Which is not something that I really have to worry about now with printing. It almost never happens. I almost never see it happening. My biggest worry, my biggest concern is when a company changes the stock that they're printing on, and I'm using the wrong profiles or I'm using the wrong approach, and then things get super dark and I'm like, what the hell?
Do they notice, or is it something you see and you go,
oh God, I hope they notice. I mean, I probably notice more than they notice.
Sure.
But there was a book that I worked on. Right, here you go. There was a book that I worked on, a mini series that I worked on, where the first issue printed great, the second issue printed horribly, the third issue printed slightly better, the fourth issue printed great, and the fifth issue printed like the third issue printed. And I did not understand it. The paper stock shifted like 2 or 3 times. It's a mystery. Don't get it.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that is something that a lot of people don't really consider when they're coloring. They just think, I want to make these nice colors or whatever, but they don't consider the fact that, if you're printing on newsprint, which sucks in the ink, or you're printing on, what is it, Mando or whatever, where it's like it's a slick, like cover stock.
Right.
Colors always really jump.
Yeah, where it sits on top.
Yeah.
Of the paper. Yeah. I mean, ink absorption that has a lot to do with color fidelity. And unfortunately, you just don't know how that is going to play out because I don't always have access to what the paper stock is going to be. A lot of printers now, they don't even supply profiles, and profiles are what you use in Photoshop. You load them into your color preferences so that you can kind of maximize the color fidelity when it goes to the press. So a lot of places don't supply those anymore. A lot of publishers don't supply them anymore. And I know back around, 2020, 2021, even 2022, a little bit, we had supply chain issues, and paper stock was really inconsistent, let's say. So you didn't know what your book was going to print on. And that was, I think, the issue that I had with that mini series, where the stock kept shifting. They used whatever they could get, I guess. But yeah, it's in some ways it's, there are less hassles with color registration and the integrity of the black line. Those things I don't have to worry about anymore, whereas I would have had to have worried about them 20 years ago. But nowadays it's more about, what happens after the book, the ink hits that paper. I mean, it used to be that I worried about color registration, and I worried about if the press was warmed up, before your book printed, because if not, there were like these weird color shifts, these color anomalies, or how drunk the pressman was before he got to work, or what shift he was on.
Right.
I
wish I had those problems now.
Hey, Chris, I have a technical question.
Sure.
Where there's a thing that we call inking for color. Kind of like the idea that the artist, the inker on the book is kind of leaving spaces open for the colorist to attack, versus somebody who's doing like a noir style, which then you're now relegated to color through. Do you when you get the ink files in and you're looking through it, are you kind of like, shit, I wish they left that open? Does that make more work for you when you have to kind of like attack a spot black or something like that?
I mean, it's a trade-off, because like not connecting certain lines, like background to foreground lines, leaving those lines disconnected does allow me a little bit of ease in making selections to do knockouts. And I do like that. I like that a lot. It saves me a lot of time. I'm more concerned with working with a good inker, though. Just a good solid inker will make my job so much easier, because it's easier to parse like light sources and weight and structures of drawings, things like that, make things look solid and believable, so that I can do what I want to do. And like that's more important to me than leaving spaces between lines and stuff, although that stuff is great. I do love that.
What about getting a clean scan that doesn't have dirt all over it?
Yes, that too. I hate wasting time cleaning up scans. Oh my god. Yeah, I mean, if it's something that I could just kind of get away with and just say, hey, you know what, this is going to look gritty anyway, we'll just leave that stuff in there, fine. But yeah, I'd much rather have a clean scan that's well inked than and I'll separate the lines if I need to.
I'm that's something that everybody worries about and fusses with, and is always like tweaking and everything. I'm sort of really interested in the fact that you were talking about having the profiles, all this technical stuff that affects how it's printed, dot gain, all these things that are, like saturation. Like I know when I color the Sunday Judge Parker, I was told by King Features that we basically have to default to the worst printer that prints the strip, right? So some old beat up Heidelberg press in Tree Fork, Alaska, you have to default to that because there's modern printers that use all the digital stuff, and then there's people that are like, it's like still 1942. So do you also have to deal with that? Right, exactly. Yeah, printing one, and then put the letterpress, right?
Right.
Which actually in high school, I had a printing class, I had a commercial art class, I had a printing class, and we actually, it was one of the first assignments was to actually set lead type and use the old letterpress to like print the thing.
Mm.
So, but do you have to, do you have like a default, or can you say, oh, I'm going to at the last minute switch my profile on this and resend the files? Like,
I mean, I could switch my profiles. I've found now a profile that works pretty well from a few different publishers that I work with. So like I'm right in a sweet spot where I could get decent results, with this one color profile. If I need to start tweaking, I don't mind tweaking. They're problem areas, problem colors that you hit if you start jerking around with the profiles too much. So you get like your reds start turning orange, or your purple start turning gray, or things like that. So you got to be careful. But I mean, I would love to just get profiles from the printer, from the publisher. That would save so much headache and so much back and forth. But you really gotta, I mean, a colorist now has to understand the technology to a degree, to this minutia, where you have to kind of build something that's going to be print proof almost. And it kind of sucks. I'd rather just spend my day painting, but
right.
There's a lot of technical shit too that you have to understand.
So does Marvel have Marvel has Marvel settings, DC has DC settings, IDW has IDW settings. Are there, you get like a technical thing from each company? Like this is our...
No.
Like a style guide almost.
No. I mean, back during New 52 and Convergence, around those times at DC,
yeah,
I actually worked with Marie Javins a bit, to come up with a profile for their paper that worked really well on those books, and then they switched to stock. So after that, and I wasn't aware that they switched to stock. I read about it on a website after I had turned in a story over my friend Brad Walker, and it printed so dark. I was so upset. I was so frustrated. But yeah, they didn't have a new printing profile to replace what we had worked on. So I kind of took some information from a few other colorists that I knew, and kind of put one together for myself that I felt worked well with DC and worked well with Marvel, because Marvel had also downgraded their stock. And I needed something that I didn't have to switch constantly over and over, depending on who I was working with. So I kind of found one that's kind of a catch-all.
Hey, what's up, Shelly? It's good to see you. You got this one, Steve? Or I can say?
Well, we got a few more here. Actually, this is about how, again, touching on how coloring has changed. Eternitine Forever on YouTube says, I absolutely adore the earlier Valiant colors. How were they created? I figured you know the magic.
Yeah, the early Valiant stuff was done all watercolor and and gouache. Janet Jackson came up with that whole process, which looked brilliant the way they were printing it. They used a really good stock to keep that color fidelity. But yeah, it's all watercolor and gouache, and it was shot. They probably statted each page, I'm imagining, just because I can't imagine them getting that kind of color reproduction without a photostat.
Yeah, there was some, I think, like Pacific Comics and people where they were literally, they were coloring on stats, and as you know, the surface of a stat is sort of water resistant. So they were like using saliva and like Q-tips and stuff to try to like
almost to
wear
wear
it on, kind of. Yeah, it was like,
yeah. That, I guess that's like poor man's gesso.
yeah.
Yeah, just to prime the surface. But you get that color on that like really brilliant white paper, and it pops. There's a lot of saturation and contrast in that.
What would be like a couple things that you would tell an aspiring colorist, besides taking your class, that are really fundamental to doing a good job?
It's all about understanding your focal point, so that the reader always sees what the thing they're supposed to see. And the best way to double check that when you're working is to squint. After I color each page, I squint, and if my eye can pick out the important thing on each page, then I know I've done my job. Right? My eye just has to land on the important thing. So I would say make sure you understand where your focal point is. You can't ever learn enough color theory. Like, even if you learn everything you need to know about color theory, you just pick up the book and learn it again. Because the better you are at it, the freer you are, and the more empowered you are to make those choices. And you'll make them faster, right? Because it'll just be muscle memory at that point. It'll be instinctual. And what else? Hit your deadlines.
You heard it here first.
Perfect. That's perfect. Where can people find you online, Chris?
If you search Sotocolor on every platform, I'm there. Blue Sky, Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, YouTube. Just put Sotocolor in, SOTOCOLOR. Instagram, I'm everywhere. Yeah.
And there was a question from our good buddy Shelley. Read Dick Tracy. Shelley says, I was going to ask if there was another class. We'll have to review and see when. Do you have a class schedule online too? Or when's the next session?
Yeah, at the comicsexperience.com website, under the courses tab, all the information about my classes are there. We don't have the specific date for the class that starts in September, but it's I usually like to start on the second Monday of the month.
Okay. All right, great. Yeah. Thanks, Shelley. And there was one last question, and we're going to let you get out of here so you can go pee, Chris. Our good buddy Bob Harrison asked. He waited to the very last minute. Silly question. Who's your favorite member of the Squadron Supreme?
Nighthawk. Love Nighthawk.
I love it. Chris, you were a fantastic guest. I say this every week. Where does the time go? But this is just. We just like
done already.
Yeah.
We just stepped right through it. It was fantastic.
Yeah. This is awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you were a good sport and came on. And I don't think I've seen the chat jump like this in a long time. You have a lot of fans in the room, a lot of colleagues here who checked in the pencil to give you your flowers, as we say in the streets.
That's
so
awesome.
I appreciate your input in the industry, and please keep working. We'd love to have you back on if you'd like to come back on at some point.
I would love to.
Right.
You guys are awesome.
Yeah, and hope to work with you again someday.
I would love that.
Yeah,
I love it. Hold on, and Stephen, what up? It's Stephen Harris. I just hung out with him last weekend. Chris said, at our age, we could take. I was doing it already. It was spinning. Thank you. All right, so Chris, we're going to get out of here. Thank you guys so much. Hang on a second because we have an outro. Thank you. We'll be here next Wednesday at 8 p.m. with our next guest. Tell them who it is, Steve.
We got Rick Veach coming in next week, so we're very excited for a great month of guests. Just a fantastic month of guests.
I love it. It's a murderer's row, Chris. I hope you're happy.
Very awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, so guys, we're going to be out. We're out of here. So I think we're in an endemic now. I'm still not sure, But I think it would behoove us all to go ahead, Chris, get them up. Wash those Kirby hands. Let's see your Kirby hands, Chris. Nice. Nice shape. Guys, thank you so much. We'll see you next week.